Welcome to Rooted and Rising Healing. I'm your host, Hallie Roderick, and this space is for women rebuilding after betrayal. Here we make sense of what happened, find truth again, and reconnect with who you really are beyond the pain. Whether you're staying, leaving, or still in the middle, your story matters. Together, we'll explore truth, clarity, and the quiet courage it takes to rise from the wreckage of what was into the wholeness of who you're becoming. You're safe to be here. In the messy middle, in the rebuilding, and in the rising. Let's begin. If you're a mom or a daughter and you've ever felt that quiet desire for deeper connection between you, but you don't want it to feel forced or uncomfortable, I want to invite you into something really special. It's called Becoming Together, a mother-daughter retreat in Sedona, Arizona, happening September 8th through the 12th, that I'm hosting alongside my own daughters. This experience is really close to our hearts because we understand that every mother-daughter relationship is unique and it's not always perfect. And this isn't about fixing anything. It's about creating a space to soften, to breathe, and to connect in your own way. Over a few beautiful days in Sedona, we'll guide you through experiences like breathwork, sound baths, mindful movement, even a vortex hike, and of course, nourishing meals. Each of us bringing our own gifts to support you, while also honoring your individual journey. There's no pressure to open up before you're ready, no expectation to be anything other than yourself, just a safe, supportive space to reconnect with yourself, with each other, and with something greater. If you feel even the smallest pull, you can find more information in the show notes, because you don't have to have a perfect relationship to begin becoming together. Welcome back to Rooted and Rising. Thanks so much for being here. Today I'm going to talk about a topic that has come up pretty heavily in a group that I run, and I thought it would be worth doing a podcast episode on. So if you've ever said the words, "This would be a deal breaker for me," and then you found yourself when it actually happened, still sitting at the kitchen table trying to figure out how to make it work, then today's episode is for you. Today we're going to talk about deal breakers. We're going to talk about non-negotiables. And right up front, I wanted to say that I'm not trying to tell you that you should be tougher or you should draw a harder line or that you should finally mean it this time. That's not what I'm saying. And I'm not telling you that you should be easily swayed or be a pushover or that you should abandon your own standards. What I want to talk about is what happens when the thing that you swore you'd never tolerate becomes the thing that you're actually living through, and what it really means to make a decision from a place of self-compassion instead of an ultimatum. So let's jump into this topic. There's a difference between having strong values and trapping yourself in an ultimatum that you may not actually end up wanting to keep. Because a deal breaker doesn't have to be like a line in the sand that then becomes used as a threat. A deal breaker can be information about yourself and what is tolerable and what is not, and not necessarily a weapon you hold over someone else. What I see happen sometimes is that we say, if I find out about this happening, then I'm out. Or if this ever happens, then I wouldn't stay for that. And we say it out loud and we use it almost like a threat to our partner. And then what happens when the reality hits and leaving actually isn't as easy as just saying I'm out, and we stay for all the valid reasons, again, that we stay, then it can put us in a position where we might even question whether what we say is what we mean, and our partner might take our words as just that, just a threat. And so I want to talk about staying connected to your own discernment, getting clear on your own inner authority, and following that instead of following some script that you might have written before you had all the facts. Because frankly, I've never met a client or a woman who has said without full conviction that if any betrayal would happen in my relationship, that would be it. That would be the end of it. I wouldn't stay if cheating happened or if any form of betrayal happened. And then it happens and they choose to stay and to work on it. And again, there's a lot of valid reasons to do that. And I think I've gone into those in other episodes. We're not going to go into that today, but if you're in that situation I'm sure that the reasons you're still here and considering staying in the relationship, if that's where you are, there's valid reasons for that. And you might be in a place where might be to the end of your rope. You might be to a place where I can no longer tolerate this. And so I want you to listen closely here too about what we're going to talk about with our inner authority. And you may have already decided to leave, and you already walked through this journey of defining what you could no longer tolerate. So the choice doesn't mean that you're weak or that your words mean nothing if you choose to stay and try to consider working it out. It means that you're a real person facing a reality that is far more complicated than when what you thought you would never tolerate was just a hypothetical. So when you are thinking about your future self from inside this current pain, it's different. You can't actually understand what it might be in the future until you're in it. And so I also encourage you to have compassion for the earlier version of you who might have made that declaration that said you would not tolerate this, because that self-compassion matters here too. The more we learn and the more we grow, sometimes I think our best learning and growth is from the things that we've done in the past. So here's what I want to think about. This is when ultimatums can backfire on you. When whatever you have defined as a deal breaker becomes a threat. So if you say, if you ever do this, then I'm gone, it can kind of put you in a corner if you don't follow through. Because you yourself might then feel like your word is now meaningless, and he might think the same thing as well. And so this can shift the focus to like enforcing the rules and credibility rather than your own clarity and safety. And I wouldn't want you to have to follow through with something if in the moment it didn't feel like the right thing to do because you've cornered yourself into saying something before. And that's an important thing to differentiate what you've said in the past and what's actually happening now. And I'll just remind you that you have a right to change your mind. You can change your mind if you've said, this is a deal breaker, I wouldn't tolerate it. And you can also say, I decided I would stay, and you can change your mind and decide to leave. So one thing that I want to really give you permission to think about is that if you get a new piece of information, whether that be through a formal therapeutic disclosure or a new discovery or a new self-disclosure, things that surface in other ways, you deserve to take the time to absorb what you just heard before you decide what it actually means for you. You don't have to make a long-term decision, even though it might feel like you need to. You need to know right now. It might feel like it's a decision that needs to be rushed in the middle of a reactive moment. But I want you to think about slowing down. Slowing down isn't indecision. It's actually giving yourself room to feel and process and determine what this new information might mean for you. Because a decision that you make today does not mean that you're in a binding contract with your future self. And as you heal and you get more information about what you can and can't tolerate or can and can't live with, then you have the right to change your mind. Because changing your mind isn't a failure of what you convicted to earlier. It's actually, what I would say, it's actually evidence that you're staying responsive to your own healing and your own growth rather than being locked into an old position. Let me give you a few things to think about. Sometimes the sexual acting out can stop, but the behaviors underneath it remain. So if you declare that your line in the sand or your deal breakers are these sexual misbehaviors, but then they stop, and there's all these other residual underlying behaviors that are continuing, like the manipulation, lack of empathy, the absence of emotional safety, then will you feel cornered into staying, even though these other unhealthy behaviors are still happening, because you said, well, these are my line in the sand? So there might be women who are able to tolerate those for a season, and then you might find yourself at some point going, I can't stay in this anymore. I can't tolerate the manipulation or the unhealthy patterns anymore. And this isn't inconsistency. This is actually growth. Let's just think about that. So the absence of the most visible behavior is not the same as the presence of safety today. And this is where I want you to really tune back into your own inner authority. As you tune into your inner authority, your intolerance of this unhealthy behavior, often becomes something that's more natural rather than forced, because your body and your spirit start to refuse what is no longer safe emotionally, psychologically, maybe physically. And so, what I would invite you to consider is that we're not here to manufacture a hard line. We're here to develop self trust, where you don't need any sort of pre written rules, because you can feel your own yes and you can feel your own no in real time, in today, in what's happening today. So, if you are in this position of going, what are my deal breakers? What are my line in the sands? I would just invite you to have some compassion in that you are allowed to not have to know right now. You're allowed to take your time, to change course, and to trust that clarity comes with your healing rather than being somebody that you feel like you have to force today. So what I'm hoping that you can carry with you today is that you're allowed not to have to know until you do, until you're in it, and until you've taken the time and the space to consider. I always encourage women to make long-term decisions from a place of clarity and confidence rather than a place of rushing or control or pain. And again, you're allowed to change your mind, not because you're weak or inconsistent, because you're growing. And the clearer you get with your own inner authority, then the less you'll have to force a hard line, because you'll simply start to feel what you can and can't live with. And that's not being indecisive, and that's not being easily swayed. That is wisdom. So I hope this has been helpful for you to give you a few things to think about. If you've enjoyed this, please share it with somebody else that you know that might need it. Leave a rating, leave a comment, help me grow my audience so that those who need this information can find it. And I'll meet you back here next week. Until then, be gentle with yourself. You're doing the work, and that matters. Thank you for being here with me inside Rooted and Rising Healing. Remember, healing isn't a destination. It's a returning to your truth, to your voice, to the woman you were always meant to be. You have the power to rise at your own pace, in your own way. And when it feels hard, just come back to your breath and remind yourself, still I rise. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love if you shared it with another sister on the journey. And until next time, stay rooted, stay rising. You've got this.